Jarell pressed his thumb against the wrinkled receipt in his palm, calculating whether the $28 in his wallet could stretch for both the prescription and dinner for his daughter. "Daddy, is 5 minutes done yet?" Brielle asked, her tiny voice muffled through the worn pink mask she wore over her freckled face. "Almost, baby, just a little longer, okay?" he said, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. The clinic waiting room was packed. Jackson had managed to snag the last seat well, half a seat on the bench beside a woman in a sharp navy coat and heels that probably cost more than his truck. She had a tablet in her lap, earbuds in, and eyes glued to the screen like she was running the world from that chair. He tried not to notice her perfume. It smelled expensive too. Brielle leaned into him, coughing lightly, and the woman next to him glanced over. Her eyes landed on the child first, softening. Then they flicked to Jackson, and something about him made her pause. He didn't look like he belonged here. Not just in the clinic, but in the world she came from. His jeans were clean but faded, his boots scuffed, and the collar of his flannel shirt was frayed. Still, there was something about his presence, something grounded, strong. "You okay?" she asked gently, pulling one earbud out. Jackson blinked, surprised. "Yeah, she's got a nasty cough. Just need to get her checked before it gets worse." The woman studied him for a moment, eyes lingering on the way Brielle clung to his side and the tired, protective way Jackson wrapped his arm around his daughter. "She's yours?" she asked. "Yeah, just me and her." The woman nodded slowly. "She's beautiful." Jackson gave a tired smile. "She gets that from her mom." There was a pause, and then she asked, "She, not around, passed away 2 years ago." "Car accident," he said simply, rubbing his hand gently over Brielle's back. "It's been just us since." A beat of silence. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That's a lot." Jackson nodded, not really sure what else to say. He didn't like pity, but her voice didn't carry any, just warmth. "I'm Zariah," she offered, extending her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm, confident. "Jackson." "Jackson and Brielle," she said softly, smiling down at the little girl who peeked at her with big, curious eyes. "You mind if I sit with you two while we wait?" Jackson looked at her, confused. "Aren't you already sitting with us?" Zariah laughed, and the sound was light, catching the attention of a nurse across the room. Fair point. They sat in a strange but comfortable quiet. A few minutes passed before Brielle whispered, "Daddy, I'm hungry." Jackson's heart sank a little. He knew they'd be here for at least another hour. He'd planned to grab a $1 burger on the way home, maybe split it between the two of them. "I'll get you something after, baby. Just hang in there." Zariah stood up suddenly. "I'll be right back." Before Jackson could ask where she was going, she returned with a small bag from the vending machine. Crackers, juice, a granola bar. She handed it to Brielle with a wink. "Clinic snacks. Not gourmet, but better than nothing." Jackson stood, bristling a bit. "Hey, I can't let you, it's just a snack," Zariah said, brushing him off. "Let her eat." Brielle didn't wait for permission. She tore open the crackers and smiled up at Zariah like she was some kind of angel. "Thank you, pretty lady," she said. Zariah grinned. "Anytime, sweetheart." Jackson sat back down, torn between pride and gratitude. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said, looking at him with soft eyes. "But I wanted to." The nurse finally called their name, and Jackson stood with Brielle in his arms. "Nice meeting you, Zariah," he said sincerely. "Thanks again," she smiled. "You too." He hesitated, then added, "Take care of yourself." "You too, Jackson." He walked away, unaware that Zariah's eyes followed him until the exam room door shut behind him. She didn't know what it was, his worn hands, the way he held his daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world, or maybe how his eyes still carried hope, even though he looked like life had knocked him down more than once, but something tugged at her. And that tug didn't go away. The next week, Zariah sat in her corner office at Finchwell Enterprises, staring blankly at the contracts in front of her. Her assistant, Nora, knocked lightly. "You've been zoning out for 10 minutes. That's not like you." Zariah blinked. "Sorry, just..." "Thinking? Want me to cancel the investor lunch?" "No," she said, standing. "I'll go, She glanced down at the folder she'd tucked into her briefcase that morning. Inside was a clinic receipt she'd found in her coat pocket. Not hers, his, Jackson's. She didn't know why she kept it. But she had. Later that afternoon, while exiting the restaurant after her lunch meeting, she spotted a familiar figure across the street. Jackson, in the same flannel shirt, holding a paper bag with a prescription logo. Brielle skipping beside him in her favorite pink jacket. Zariah stopped walking. "Ma'am," her driver asked. "Give me a minute," she said. She crossed the street without thinking. "Jackson," he turned, surprised. "Zariah, what are you doing here?" she asked quickly, smiling. "Pharmacy run." Brielle's still got the cough, but it's getting better. Zariah looked down at Brielle. "Hey there, sweetheart." "Hi, pretty lady," Brielle said again, beaming. Zariah laughed, crouching to eye level. "You remember me. Daddy said you bought me snacks." "Well, I'm glad you liked them." Jackson shifted, clearly a little embarrassed. "We were just headed to the park. It's free, so mind if I join?" His eyebrows shot up. "You want to come to the park?" "Yeah," she said, like it was nothing. "I've got an hour free." Brielle grabbed her hand immediately, and Jackson didn't have a chance to protest. At the park, they sat on the bench while Brielle ran to the swings. Zariah kicked off her heels and folded her coat beside her. "You didn't have to come," Jackson said. "I wanted to," she replied, watching Brielle with a smile. "She's sweet. She's everything." Zariah glanced at him. "You're doing a good job, you know." He looked at her, surprised. "Thanks, I try." She hesitated. "Jackson, what do you do for work, I mean?" He sighed. "Construction." "Off and on. Took a hit during the pandemic. Been doing odd jobs, whatever I can find." Zariah nodded. "That must be hard." "It is, but I don't have a choice." She looked at him, really looked at him. "You ever think about doing something else?" He laughed. "Like what?" "I barely finished high school." Zariah's eyes flicked to her phone, then back to him. "Would you trust me if I said I might be able to help?" Jackson frowned. "Why would you want to?" She smiled softly. "Because I think you deserve a break." He stared at her, unsure. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," she said, and somehow that felt like the truth. Jackson stepped out of the modest two-bedroom apartment he'd scraped together for him and Brielle last year. The rent was late again. He'd already spoken to the landlord twice this week, promising to come up with something by Friday. It wasn't that he didn't want to work, he just couldn't seem to land anything steady that paid enough to keep them afloat. He tugged his worn jacket tighter against the chill, the morning breeze biting as he hoisted Brielle onto his hip. She was still drowsy from sleep, her cheek pressed to his shoulder as she clutched her stuffed bear. "Daddy, are we going to the park again?" "Not today, baby. I gotta meet someone about a job, but Miss Kathy's gonna look after you till I get back." Brielle nodded, not fully awake but trusting him completely. Jackson gave her a kiss on the forehead and handed her over to the retired neighbor who watched her when he had to hustle for work. Miss Kathy, bless her, never asked for a dime, but Jackson always tried to bring her groceries or fix something around her apartment in return. He caught the bus 30 minutes later, heading to an address that Zariah had scribbled on the back of a napkin the day they'd run into each other outside the pharmacy. "If you're serious," she'd said, "come by tomorrow." Noon. He hadn't expected her to follow through, but the directions were real, and the building was towering, a sleek glass and steel structure that looked like it belonged in a movie. Jackson stood at the foot of it now, feeling like a man in work boots who'd wandered into a private airport. Inside, he fidgeted near the security desk until a sharply dressed woman with a headset approached him. "Mr. Jarell, Miss Finchwell is expecting you." He blinked. "She is." The woman gave a polite nod and gestured toward the elevator. "Top floor." He rode up in silence, trying not to feel like a fraud. When the doors slid open, Zariah was waiting in the lobby, standing beside a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the skyline. She was wearing a tailored ivory blazer over wide leg trousers, and her hair was pulled back with a gold clip. "You came," she said. "I wasn't sure I should. Figured you were just being nice." "I don't say things I don't mean," she replied. "Come on in." He followed her through a glass door into an office that was more like a penthouse suite. There were fresh orchids on the side table, a marble-top desk, and a framed photo of Zariah with a woman who looked like an older version of her, probably her mother. "Have a seat," she said, motioning to a leather chair across from her. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Jackson sat slowly, his calloused hands resting on his knees. "I own Finchwell Enterprises," she began. "It's a private investment firm. We manage assets, support startups, and fund community development projects. Lately, I've been looking to expand our contractor network." He tilted his head slightly. You're offering me a job, I'm offering you a trial, she said. We've got a community housing renovation in Westbridge. The crew there is short-handed. It's temporary for now, but if it goes well, I can bring you on full-time. Jackson blinked. Why me? Zariah leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on her desk. Because I've met 100 men in suits who can quote numbers and handle spreadsheets. But I haven't met many who'd skip lunch to buy crackers for their kid, or show up at a pharmacy when they're barely holding it together and still manage to keep smiling at their daughter. He swallowed hard. I don't want charity, he said quietly. This isn't charity, she replied. It's a chance. You can take it or leave it, but I think you'd be good at it. Jackson glanced down at his hands, then back at her. When do I start? Tomorrow. 7 sharp. I'll text you the site address, he nodded. Thank you, Zariah smiled faintly. Don't thank me yet. It's hard work. I'm used to hard. As he stood to leave, she walked him to the elevator. Just before the doors opened, she looked up at him. You know, I didn't think I'd see you again after the clinic. Yeah, well, life's full of surprises, she hesitated. You ever need anything else, tools, transport, whatever, just let me know. He studied her for a moment. Why are you doing this, really? Zariah didn't waver. Because I want to. Later that evening, after putting Brielle to bed, Jackson sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the crumpled site directions Zariah had sent over. He still couldn't quite believe any of it had happened. The next morning, he arrived at the construction site early. The foreman, a gruff man named Pete, handed him a hard hat and pointed him toward the back lot where framing was underway. By mid-morning, Jackson was hauling lumber, measuring beams, and guiding a younger guy through drywall prep. The work was honest, physical, and it paid. 2 days later, Zariah showed up on site in jeans and a field jacket, her heels swapped for clean white sneakers. She walked the grounds with Pete, inspecting the progress. Jackson spotted her from the second floor of the skeletal structure and watched as she took notes, asked questions, and nodded at the crew with easy confidence. She didn't see him until she turned toward the scaffolding. You're early, he called down. You're dusty, she replied. Part of the charm, he said, making his way down. She waited until he reached her, then handed him a small paper bag. What's this? Lunch. I figured you'd forget. He opened it to find a turkey sandwich, a bottle of lemonade, and a bag of kettle chips. You always feed the help. I feed the people I like, she said simply. Jackson studied her. You're not like anyone I've met before. Zariah tilted her head. That's mutual. They stood there a moment, the noise of hammers and saws around them, something unspoken settling between them. You want to sit? He asked. She nodded, and he led her to an overturned bucket near the shadow of the building they were raising. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between two people who don't need to fill every second with words. After a while, she asked, What did you want to be before all this? He chuckled. Didn't have time to think about that. Try. He took a breath. I used to draw houses when I was a kid, floor plans, staircases. I liked the idea of building something permanent. Her eyes lit up. You ever think about going back to school? He shook his head. Not in the cards right now. Brielle comes first. Zariah didn't press. If things work out with Finchwell, maybe we can talk about next steps. He watched her carefully. You always invest this much in people you just met. No, she said. But then again, I don't meet people like you every day. Jackson looked away, unsure how to respond, but inside something stirred, something that hadn't moved in a long time, hope, possibility, maybe even something more. Zariah tapped her fingers against the polished wood of the boardroom table, her focus drifting as the quarterly financials flashed across the presentation screen. The numbers were up. The projections were solid. The team was pleased. But her mind was elsewhere on the construction site, on Jackson's hands as he measured beams with quiet precision, on the way he looked at Brielle like she was his whole universe. When the meeting adjourned, she didn't stay to debrief. Instead, she walked briskly across the office to her private lounge, closed the door, and pressed her phone to her ear. Nora, reschedule the call with the Singapore partners. I need the afternoon clear. She hung up before any questions could follow and stared out the window, her reflection caught in the glass. She looked like every inch the woman in control, but inside, something had shifted, and it wasn't just curiosity anymore. Later that day, she drove herself downtown, away from the glossy towers and quiet cafes she was used to. She pulled into the lot behind the construction site, dust rising around the tires of her car, and stepped out in jeans and a navy utility jacket, her heels swapped for work boots this time. Jackson was up on the scaffolding, hammer in hand, sleeves rolled, a pencil tucked behind his ear. He didn't see her at first. "Hey," she called up, shielding her eyes from the sun. "You always this focused?" He looked down, grinned, and climbed down slowly. "Only when I've got someone to impress." "You're doing a decent job of it," she said, handing him a bottle of water. He took it with a nod. "I didn't think you'd come back again this week. I had time. Besides, I wanted to ask you something." He wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "What's that? Are you free tomorrow night?" Jackson blinked. "You mean like a date?" "I mean exactly that." He hesitated. "I'd need to find someone to watch Brielle." "I already did," she said. "Miss Kathy said she'd be happy to help. I called her earlier." Jackson stared at her. "You called Kathy?" She listed her number on the emergency contact sheet for the site. "I checked with Pete. I wanted to make sure I wasn't asking for something impossible." He looked at her like he was seeing her differently. "You don't give up easy, do you?" "Not when I want something." He nodded slowly, eyes never leaving hers. "Okay, I'm in." The next evening, Jackson stood in front of his closet, which mostly consisted of work shirts and jackets. Eventually, he settled on his cleanest pair of dark jeans and a simple black button-down. Miss Kathy arrived right on time, and Brielle ran to greet her with the kind of joy only a child could muster. "You gonna be fancy, Daddy?" she asked, tugging at his sleeve. Jackson crouched beside her. "Not too fancy, just dinner." "Will she wear lipstick?" He laughed. "Probably." Brielle nodded seriously. "Then you gotta be extra nice." "I'll do my best." When he stepped outside, Zariah was already waiting near the curb, standing beside a sleek black car that wasn't the one she usually had her driver bring. She wore a copper-wrapped dress that hugged her waist and fell just below her knees, paired with low boots. Her hair was down, caught slightly in the wind. "You clean up all right," she said. "So do you." They drove in comfortable silence to the restaurant, a quiet, candlelit place on the edge of the river, tucked behind a row of art galleries. The hostess greeted Zariah by name and led them to a corner table with a view of the water. Jackson leaned back in his chair, running a hand along the edge of the table. "This place is something else. I wanted it to be special." "It is." The waiter brought wine, and Zariah ordered without needing to look at the menu. Jackson hesitated, then chose something safe: grilled steak, roasted vegetables. When the waiter left, she leaned forward, her voice softer now. "I know this isn't your usual scene." He met her gaze. "No. But I'm glad you brought me here." "Why?" "Because it's the first time in a long while I've felt like more than just a single dad trying to make it to the next payday." Zariah didn't speak for a moment. Then, "You are more than that." Jackson looked down at his hands. "Sometimes it's hard to see it when you're buried under bills and trying to keep a 5-year-old healthy." "I know." He looked up. "Do you?" She sat back, her expression unreadable. "My father left when I was 7. My mother raised me alone. We didn't have much. I remember watching her skip meals and tell me she wasn't hungry. I didn't understand it then." Jackson studied her. "You don't talk about that much, I bet." "Not often," she admitted. "But I think you'd understand it more than most." Their food arrived, but neither reached for their forks right away. The conversation had settled into something deeper. "You know," he said, "I keep trying to figure out why someone like you would bother with someone like me." Zariah tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you could be with someone who wears suits every day and flies to Paris for lunch. Not someone who has to borrow gas money from his neighbor to make it to work." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "Maybe I've had that life. Maybe I've had the suits and the private jets. And maybe none of that ever felt like this." His hand turned over, palm up, and she slid hers into it. He didn't say anything more, and neither did she. After dinner, they walked along the river, the night cool and quiet, the city lights reflected in the water. Jackson paused near the railing, watching a boat pass beneath the bridge. "I don't know where this is going," he said honestly, "but I know I want to find out." Zariah leaned against his shoulder. "So do I." Before he dropped her off, she leaned in and kissed him soft, unhurried but certain. When she pulled away, her eyes searched his face like she was committing it to memory. "Good night, Jackson. Good night, Zariah." She waited until he'd gone inside before she drove away, her heart steady but racing all at once. Back in the apartment, Jackson peeked in on Brielle, fast asleep, curled around her bear. He sat on the edge of his bed, her kiss still lingering on his mouth, and knew something in his life had shifted, not because of a job, not because of a dinner, because of her. Jackson stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of the new blazer he'd picked up only that morning. It wasn't designer, nothing like the tailored suits he'd seen on the men who worked in Zariah's building, but it was clean, sharp, and more than he'd ever worn outside of a funeral. Brielle peeked from behind the door, already in her pajamas. "Are you going to see Miss Zariah again?" He turned, crouching. "Yeah, sweet Pia. There's a big event tonight. She asked me to come." "Is it fancy?" "Very." She leaned closer, eyes wide. "Do they have cake?" He laughed. "I'll try to bring you some." Miss Kathy arrived with a bag of puzzle books and a tub of strawberries, and Jackson kissed Brielle goodbye, promising he wouldn't be too late. Then he stepped out into the cool night and into the car Zariah had sent for him. The gala was held at the rooftop ballroom of the Langford Hotel, a place he'd driven past 100 times, but never imagined stepping foot inside. The elevator opened directly into a room filled with warm golden light, string quartets, and people in gowns that shimmered like rain. He paused just inside the entrance, unsure where to stand, until a man in a dark suit stepped forward. "You must be Mr. Jarell, Miss Finchwell is expecting you." He was led through the crowd, past tables draped in ivory linen and chandeliers that looked like floating constellations, to where Zariah stood near a small circle of board members. She wore a silver dress that caught the light in ripples, her hair pulled back in a way that made her shoulders seem even stronger. When she saw him, her entire expression changed, not in some dramatic way, but as if the air had shifted around her. She excused herself from the group and walked toward him, her heels silent on the marble floor. "You made it. You weren't kidding about it being fancy. I wanted you to see this part of my life too." He looked around. "I feel like I should be carrying a tray of champagne." She stepped closer, her voice low. "You belong here as much as anyone. I'm not sure everyone in this room would agree." "I don't care what they think," she said simply. Before he could respond, a man approached, a tall, salt and pepper executive with a sharp jaw and a voice that carried. "Zariah, you didn't mention we'd be adding to the guest list." "This is Jackson Jarell," she said. "He's part of our Westbridge housing project." The man extended a hand. "Ah. Yes, the community renovation. Good work out there. Heard it's ahead of schedule." Jackson shook his hand, trying to keep it that way. As the man turned to greet someone else, Zariah leaned in. "That was Barrett, VP of Acquisitions." "He never remembers names. He remembered yours. He's been trying to poach me for years," she said with a smile. They walked out onto the balcony, away from the hum of conversation and clinking glasses. The city stretched out below them, twinkling and alive. Zariah rested her hands on the railing. "I used to come up here after hours when I first bought the company, just to remind myself it was real. You don't seem like someone who doubts herself." "I don't much. But when you grow up on the edge of everything, it takes a while to believe you can belong in the middle of it." He looked at her, something settling in his chest. "That's the first thing you've said that sounds like me." She turned. "There's something I want to show you." They stepped back inside, weaving through the crowd. She led him down a side corridor to a smaller room, quieter, lined with floor-to-ceiling boards of architectural sketches and mock-ups. "These are our next projects," she said. "Affordable housing, co-ops, community centers." He stepped closer, scanning the drawings. "This one's in Eastwood," she nodded. "We're scouting for a lead on it, someone who understands the neighborhood, the people." He turned to her carefully. "Are you offering me that? I'm asking if you want it." He didn't answer right away. He walked the length of the room, studying every sketch, every floor plan, then he turned. "Yeah, I do." Her face softened. "Then it's yours." He stepped toward her. "Why are you really doing this?" She met his eyes without flinching. "Because you have a gift for building things that last, and because I've never met someone who made me want to build something with them." The room felt suddenly still. "I can't offer you private jets or penthouses," he said slowly, but I can give you the kind of loyalty that doesn't shatter when the shine wears off." "I don't want shine," she said. "I want real." He kissed her. Not tentative, not rushed. It was the kind of kiss that closed the distance between two lives that had run parallel until now. When they pulled apart, she pressed her forehead to his. "There's one more thing," she whispered. "I want you to meet my mother." Jackson blinked. "That's serious, huh?" "She's the only one who needs convincing," she said with a grin. "And I think Brielle will help with that." The night ended with Jackson walking her to her car. Before she opened the door, she turned to him. "I've never fallen this fast before." "Me neither," he said. "But I'm not scared of it." "Good," she said, "because I want you next to me for the long haul." Jackson watched her drive away, then pulled out his phone and called Miss Kathy. Brielle answered, her voice sleepy. "Did you bring cake?" "No, baby," he said, grinning. "But I've got something better. I think we're about to build something really big. Like a castle, exactly like that." And for the first time in years, Jackson stood under the night sky and felt like he wasn't surviving anymore. He was living for her, for Brielle, for the future he never saw coming. One where love came in the shape of a woman with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. A woman who saw him when no one else had and loved him, not in spite of everything he'd lost, but because of everything he was. Rain tapped softly against the window panes of Zariah's townhouse as she tied the final ribbon on a box in the entryway. The scent of cinnamon and pine laced the air from the candles flickering across the living room, and a low jazz melody played from the vintage record player she'd picked up the week before. It had taken her years to fill this house with things that felt like her. But tonight, with the fire glowing and the clock nearing 7, it finally felt like home. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Jackson holding Brielle in one arm and an umbrella in the other. "She fell asleep halfway through the drive," he whispered, stepping inside. "She's getting heavier," Zariah said quietly, brushing a damp curl from the girl's cheek. Jackson set her down gently on the couch, where a folded blanket was already waiting. Zariah covered her, smoothing the fabric over her little shoulders. "She insisted on bringing that book about the moon," he said, setting a small backpack by the door. "Told me she wanted to show you the page with the craters." Zariah smiled faintly. "I'll make sure she does tomorrow." He stepped into the living room, eyeing the wrapped box on the table. "That for me." "It is, but you have to open it after dinner." They ate at the long oak table beneath the pendant lights she'd had installed herself 2 years ago. Jackson had brought over roasted chicken and grilled squash from a recipe he'd been experimenting with. Zariah added a salad tossed with pomegranate seeds and citrus vinaigrette. They didn't talk much as they ate, but it was a quiet that felt full, comfortable. Afterward, they sat side by side on the couch, Brielle still asleep behind them. Rain continued to patter against the windows, mellow and steady. "I signed the contract this morning," Jackson said quietly. "Eastwood's officially mine." Zariah turned toward him, her eyes bright. "You're going to transform that neighborhood," he nodded. "It's more than just a job, it's a chance to give people what I never had." She reached for his hand. "You're already doing that." "You've given me more than you know." He leaned back, studying her with a weight in his gaze she hadn't seen before. "When you first walked into that clinic, I thought you were just passing through, the kind of person who sees the mess and walks away untouched. I don't walk away easy." "No." "You don't." He stood suddenly and walked to the small stack of sketches she kept on the console table. He pulled one out and handed it to her. "What's this?" "It's a house," he said. "Well, it's more than that. It's where I see us. You, me, Brielle. It's not a mansion, no pool, no grand staircase. But there's a porch big enough for 3 rocking chairs, a reading nook for her, a kitchen where you can keep your spice rack alphabetized." She looked up, eyes clouding. "You drew this, every wall, every window. I wanted you to see it before I build it." Zariah set the drawing down carefully like it was sacred. "You think we're ready for that? I think we've been ready. I think I've been waiting for someone who doesn't see me as a project or a pity case. You saw me, you saw Brielle. And you didn't just accept us, you made space for us." She rose slowly, standing in front of him. "You've made space for me too, Jackson. I didn't even know I was missing anything until you showed up with those tired eyes and that quiet strength." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small black box. "I didn't want to do this here. I had some idea about a rooftop and lights and a string quartet, but this feels more like us." She opened the lid carefully. Inside was a simple silver band with a small, round diamond elegant, understated and impossibly perfect. "I don't have a penthouse to offer you," he said. "But I want to build a life with you, from the ground up. Will you marry me?" Zariah inhaled softly, blinking fast. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him into a kiss that melted the rest of the world away. Behind them, Brielle stirred, turning over beneath her blanket with a sleepy yawn. "Did you bring the cake, Daddy?" Zariah laughed, wiping a tear from her cheek. "No cake, but I think we've got something better." Brielle blinked up at them, confused. "What's better than cake?" Jackson lifted her into his arms. "How about a family?" The months that followed unfolded like a blueprint coming to life. Jackson's Eastwood site broke ground in early spring, and Zariah visited every week, bringing iced tea for the crew and sitting with him during lunch breaks to talk through design ideas. Brielle was enrolled in a nearby preschool with a scholarship from a foundation Zariah quietly funded, and she came home every day with glitter in her hair and stories about her new friends. The wedding was held in the backyard of their new home, yes, the one from the drawing. Jackson built it board by board, with a porch wide enough for 3 rocking chairs and a reading nook tucked beneath the stairs. Zariah wore a satin dress with no train, no veil, just a single bloom tucked behind her ear. Jackson wore his best shirt and the same boots he'd worn the day they met. Brielle stood between them in a lavender dress, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. When the officiant asked who gave the bride away, she raised her hand proudly and declared, "Me." They exchanged vows as the sun dipped below the horizon, the air warm and fragrant with jasmine. No crowds, no photographers, just a dozen people who mattered and a promise that would never be broken. After the ceremony, they danced in the grass under string lights Jackson had hung himself. Zariah rested her head on his shoulder, her eyes closed, content. "I never thought love would come this way," she whispered. "I never thought I'd be worthy of it," he replied. "You were always worthy. You just needed someone to remind you." They kissed as Brielle twirled barefoot nearby, laughing with chocolate on her cheeks. Eventually, the music faded, the lights dimmed, and the guests trickled out. But the laughter inside their house never stopped. The kitchen stayed warm with meals cooked together, the porch filled with late-night talks and sleepy goodnights. And every morning, Jackson woke with his arms around the woman who'd once walked into his life with nothing but kindness in her eyes and left him with everything he'd ever needed, not riches, not power, just love, real, steady, fierce love. And that was more than enough.